Hello, students. So last time we discussed the conflict approach to religion, and we had started with the next subtopic, that is on secularization. Fine. And we did start with the definition of secularism, secularization. And there is a plurality of views with regard to defining secularization, because there is no unanimity with regard to what is religion and in terms of exact definition. Thereby, sociologists differ in defining what is secularism, and thereby there is a plurality of views, or they differ among themselves with regard to the definition of secularization. So, in this situation of plurality of views, lack of unanimity, so sociologists have articulated 4 different ways of looking at secularization, or 4 different types of secularization. So how do we look at secularization? 4 different viewpoints. And as I told you yesterday, the basic assumption is that there is an institution of religion. Okay, institution-centric religion. That there can be no religion. This is a basic assumption, that there can be no religion without religious institutions. Okay? So, institutional religion or institution-centric religion is one of the most importantly agreed points. So, we will talk about secularization with regard to institutional religion. So, institutional religion with regard to participation. With regard to participation, institutional religion with regard to participation, that whether people have been participating in religious institutions in a big way, and if there is any change or decline in the participation of religious institution, shall we consider this to be an indicator of secularization? Is that correct? So, we begin with this. So, some researchers have seen religious institutions and activity associated with them as the key to the religious practices or key to religious behavior. From this viewpoint, they have measured the importance of religion in society. So, when you are talking about participation, so one indicator of participation could be, you say, church attendance. Christians are supposed to visit church every Sunday. Sunday morning is the church time. They go for a collective. So, like in Islam, they have a Jummah. Okay. So, that is I think Friday. Okay. So, they have a mass congregation and collective worship. Mass worship, congregation and joint worship. So, that is attendance. Church attendance is an example of participation. And not only that, with regard to other celebrations, important occasions like birth, marriage, death. On such occasions, people used to invoke religious practices. They will visit church and perform rituals, etc. Statistics on church attendance in England and Wales indicate a study that there is a decline in church attendance during the 20th century compared to 19th century. 1851 census of religion showed that just under 40% of the adult population attended church each week. But by the turn of century, the figure dropped to 35. And by 1950, it came down to 20. And by 1970, it came down to only 10%. That 10% of adults in England and Wales, they attend Sunday churches. So there is a sharp decline in church attendance. There has been steady, though less sharp, decrease in the number of baptism, confirmation, church marriages, Sunday school attendance, etc. Okay. So the decline in church-oriented religious activity has been paralleled by decrease in the numbers of clergies. If people do not attend church and the religious practices they follow are less rigorous, they are no more ritualistic, and they don't visit church, then what is the need of having so many clergies? So as there was a decline in practice of religion, particularly in Christianity, there was also a proportionate decline in the occupation of clergies. They decline in number. So statistics on religious activity must be regarded with caution. You know, there are some, you read the book, it will show that it will give you some figures, as I told you, attendance in the church declining from 40% to 10%. So there can be many more figures with regard to other kinds of practices. So how seriously we should take into account these statistics? Whether in 19th century were they very serious about collecting data, or the data, what is the error possibility there, error limit there, and what is the reliability character of this data. So the strictness of standards of reliability is a question for these data. However, researchers such as Brian Wilson, professor of sociology, who rely heavily on this type of information, go further to argue that the decline in organized religious participation indicates a way in which the churches are losing direct influence over the ideas and activities of man. So if on many, even if you admit some amount of error, but there is a definite trend, maybe even it is commonsensical, that with the advent of modernity, industrialization, people have reduced their religious practices. So participation in institutional religion have declined in a big way. So Brian Wilson says that this is a good indicator of declining importance of religion in the life of people, which means there is growing amount of secularization. There is growing amount of secularization. Now, the argument goes that would you take church attendance so seriously, even if it was in 19th century or even early 20th century? One argument given against this is that earlier, in 19th century and early 20th century, church attendance or religious practices which are church-centric and where you involve clergies was actually some kind of a middle-class way of life, and some values were attached to this. So, middle-class way of looking at things, or middle-class, some kind of aristocratic, aristocratic notion of respectability. So, was associated with institutional practice of religion. So, it was treated, if you do not have church attendance and if you do not involve clergies in important occasions in your life, your social acceptable, you are not a true Christian. You are not a true Christian. And if you are not a true Christian, then in the middle class society, your respectability will decline. You will be treated as a heretical guy, not a true Christian. So, middle class respectability was a great factor, because of which people used to attend church and involve clergies in their religious practices. But with the rise of modernity or advancement of modernization in the West, now there is a change. There is a change. Church attendance and involvement of church or clergies in important occasions of life that is marriage, death, etc. So, these are indicators. So, decline in this, which means declining secularization. Declining. Now, the next argument is given that it is associated with middle class, respectability. But now we say with the advancement of modernity or modernization, this was the view maintained by you say Brian Wilson, sociologist. Now, we argue further that with the advancement of modernity, religion has taken a different turn. The importance of religion might not have declined, but the way we practice religion had changed. Okay? With the advancement of modernity or with modernity, with modernization, there is a turn in which, or the turn indicating the way religion is practiced. With modernization, there is a change visible as to how religion is practiced. As to how religion is practiced. So these are earlier, this church attendance involving clergies, etc. These are collective involvements, collective participation, collective participation. But now our sociologist Robert Bellah, B-E-L-L-A-H, okay, University of California at Berkeley. Bellah used to teach sociology there. Robert Bellah argues that decline in institutional religion cannot be taken as an indication of decline of religion in the life of Christians. Robert Bellah argues that with modernization there is a change visible as to how religion is practiced, because religion has increasingly become privatized, in the sense that it is no more important to be publicly religious or practice religion in a public way. You can be religious, you can be a good believer, but religion is your private domain. Religion is your private domain. So privately you can practice religion because officially you are secular. Officially you are secular, privately you are religious, and there is no bar with regard to you practice any religion. So religion has become increasingly a private affair. So Bellah says religion is now a private affair. Religion is now a private affair. So that does not mean that your belief label has declined. You can continue to be a true Christian. You can be a good believer. But instead of practicing religion publicly in public institutions, you can practice at home and in private. So this is becoming irrelevant in a way. That's what Robert Bellah argues. Religion today may simply be expressed in a different way. Bellah argues that there has been a move from collective worship to private worship. There is a move from collective worship to private worship. Sorry. So there is a move from collective worship to private worship. So, but that does not mean that you cease to be a Christian or you cease to be a believer. The assumption in most of the major Protestant denominations is that church members can be considered responsible for himself, while there is little dispute that participation in institutional religion has declined over past century in most European countries, and there is considerable disagreement over the interpretation of this phenomenon. Okay, so this is one. Now we discussed institutional religion, participation. So this is one view with regard to secularization. Let us look at secularization from the second viewpoint, that is institutional religion, disengagement and differentiation. Institutional religion disengagement and differentiation. Disengagement and differentiation. This is view number 2. Okay. So let us discuss this. What does it mean? Some researchers have noted that religion earlier, the way it was in medieval times or in early days, religion in medieval times was very powerful. In the sense that its importance was very high. And religion was almost like all-encompassing. It was all-encompassing. It was the most important social institution in human life because it used to touch upon almost every aspect of life. It was a single institution which used to influence almost every other institution of life, every other aspect of life. Okay? So it was an extremely powerful institution which had a very, very wider role to play in human life. It was directly involved in every important area of life. For example, so in medieval times, religion was controlling education. Earlier there was no secular education, the education which you have today. That education which was there earlier, it was not secular education, that was religious education. That was religious education. So religion controlled, or it was controlling education. It was also controlling arts, literature, sculpture, etc. Most of the arts were religious arts. Sculptures, statues were all had religious implications. So, art, literature, sculpture, they were all controlled by religion, is to control these also. So, apart from these, religion also most important was controlling politics. I gave you an example that kings used to rule with divine right. So, it was also controlling politics in oblique state. State is the political unit. State was the political unit. So, religion was controlling politics, means it had a great influence in deciding the matters of the state. Kings cannot move or could not move without consulting the church. So, with regard to politics and the governance of the state, religion used to play an extremely important role, because the states were not secular states before modernity. The states were not secular states. Today's states are almost all secular states, except few Islamic states, those who have declared themselves as Islamic republics. The last Hindu state, India was never a Hindu state. Even after becoming independence, through a constitutional democracy, India has declared itself to be a secular state. The last Hindu state that existed in this world was Nepal, and sometimes in the late 1980s, it changed over, the communists have taken over, so it is no more a Hindu state. So, state was under tremendous control of religion. Entire Europe was controlled by the church, and because they were very close to the church, to the kings, and kings with or in agreement with the church used to rule. So, state, politics, art, literature, sculpture, education, and for your kind information, even healthcare system, even healthcare, there was something called the faith healers, summons. The summons, even the Buddhist monks give treatments. In Islam also you will find mullahs offers also some kind of treatment. So, healthcare was also to some extent under the influence of religion. Okay. So, religion was extremely influential. So, politics, state, healthcare, etc., almost every aspect of life was influenced or was under the strong influence of religion. But with growing modernization, today secular themes predominate. So, the state and states have all become free from the influence of mostly, not everyone or every state. So, politics has become secular politics. This is one. So, state has separated itself from religion. Okay. So is healthcare system. Healthcare system is now much more scientific. You have various system of healthcare system, and the dominant one is allopathy, modern Western healthcare system, what we call is allopathy. But there are competing, somebody says there is Ayurveda, there is homeopathy, then there is some Unani, there are several kinds, but they are insignificant. They are very small in number, insignificant, but there is modern scientific healthcare system, okay, based on modern medicine system, knowledge with regard scientific knowledge system. So there is religion has also been thrown out of healthcare system. Religion has been thrown out of state and politics. Religion's education has become increasingly secular, absolutely secular education. Education is absolutely secular because the government and the state is secular. So it is today's education is scientific education. Now, even art, literature, they have been slowly taken away from the influence of religion. Although in literature there can be some, literary work which are religious, we have not completely disassociated sculpture, literature, art from religion. There the presence of religion is there, religious touch is there, but there can be non-religious art, modern art. There can be fiction in literature, there can be non-religious literature, okay, and so is non-religious sculpture, etc. So that is called disengagement. It's called disengagement. When religion was controlling almost everything, slowly you will find you have released religion, disengaged religion from many, many activities. That is the meaning of disengagement. That's the meaning of disengagement. You have slowly taken off many of the activities from the influence or from the domain of religion. Next is with regard to differentiation. With regard to differentiation. So what is the meaning of differentiation? We will go back with regard to differentiation to our author Talcott Parsons. With regard to Talcott Parsons, an alternative to the view of disengagement equals to secularization is provided by Talcott Parsons. That church as an institution has lost many of its former functions. He argues that the evolution of society involves the process of structural differentiation. Parsons talks about structural differentiation. Differentiation is just a shorter expression, otherwise the true expression is structural differentiation. Structural differentiation means a structure slowly breaks. For example, earlier you had an institution called joint family. So with the advancement of modernity, the joint family system broke, okay? So it became a monogamous nuclear family. Now, from one joint family, several families emerged. So a structure is broken. Out of a large structure, many or several small structures emerged. Okay? So that's the meaning of structural differentiation. And that happens, and these small structures which come out of the large structure are functionally, or these are functional units. These are functional units. Something similar to disengagement, he says, if family breaks into nuclear family, several nuclear families, then they become much more specialized. They become much more. So you only become a provider of food. You provide, because if you are specialized, then family used to do health care practices. Now, even old, you do not take care of your old parents. Old parents are sent to old age homes. So gone. So family has given rise to another institution called old age home. Family earlier used to take care of the young. Today women go to work, and young people, young children are left in creche. They are put into what you call kindergarten schools. So these are new institutions which have come in place of family. Family used to, earlier when you have older parents and big family, the younger people used to get affection, used to be looked after within the family. But today you put them into creche, you send them to kindergarten schools. So these are new institutions which have emerged in place of joint family. And early days again, family was also an economic unit. Family was an economic unit. It had its own resources, land, business, etc. Now you send your children to fetch a job outside. Earlier, instead of without going for a job, they could maintain themselves. They had land, they had business, and they were self-supporting. Now you send your children to take up jobs, employment outside, because family earlier was the employer for itself. Family itself was the employer. So you find now, if you say there is an employment agency or a manufacturing unit that have come up which is giving employment, are they not working in place of family? Have not they taken over the works of family? Yes. So that is the meaning of structural differentiation, and these have occurred in every successive stage, slowly in a long run process. Slowly in a long run process, this has occurred. So this is the meaning of structural differentiations to Talcott, Parsons. Structural differentiation by, it's a Talcott Parsons. So Parsons says that even maybe family has become smaller and smaller, and the functions of family also have become lesser and lesser. Family has become smaller and smaller in size, and the functions of family also have become lesser and lesser. So the differentiation of the units of the social system does not necessarily lessen the importance. As outlined in a previous section, Parsons argues that religious beliefs still give meaning and significance to life. Religion continues to define what is truth, absolute truth, and it continues to give meaning to life, meaning and significance of life. Churches are still the font for religious ethics and values. That has been seriously eroded, okay? As religious institutions become increasingly specialized, as religious institutions become increasingly specialized, Parsons maintains that their ethics and values become increasingly generalized. Values and ethics have become increasingly generalized. Religious values and ethics have become increasingly generalized. Okay. Although there is a declining importance of religion. In American society, that have become the basis for more general social values. Maybe religion has become increasingly specialized, but the values and ethics have become increasingly generalized. So, religion no more does all these functions. Religion is now doing only few functions. Okay? So, maybe it is just giving meaning and significance to life. It has an interpretative role. It has an interpretative role. So, from art, literature, education, it has now come down only to this function. But the values of and ethics of religion have become increasingly generalized. You will find even business ethics, there is a religious trust. So, you are today talking about what you call corporate social responsibility. Corporate sector is making huge profits. What is its responsibility towards mankind? Should it? But earlier they used to do it instead of saying corporate social responsibility, they used to call earlier philanthropy. It was earlier known as philanthropy. So, philanthropic activities means donations, charity, etc. So, earlier donations and charity were given voluntarily. Today there is a law which is compelling you that you should do little bit of charity and we will give you income tax benefit on this. So, values and ethics have become increasingly generalized. So, respect for mankind, respect for human life, the modern healthcare system does respect. So, you make law, you bring out development projects, there is a question of human rights violation, how many people have become homeless, how many people have been evicted. So, these are all great humanitarian concerns. So, the corporate sector will be subject to human rights abuse, human rights concerns. So, the values and ethics have become increasingly generalized. From religion you have applied them. So, also in scientific profession, when you carry out experiments, when you conduct field work, are you being, there is some professional ethics. Are you exploiting human beings or your subjects? Are you exploiting animals, guinea pigs, many the ethical considerations. Ethical considerations even in research. So, the same values and ethics, the source is religion. Therefore, Parsons says that from this perspective, disengagement or Parsons terminology, structural differentiation does not equate to secularization. It does not equate to secularization. Note that it does not equate to secularization. Okay, so students, now we stop here today. Okay, so tomorrow we will continue with our discussion on secularization. Tomorrow we will continue with our discussion on secularization. So today we discussed two perspectives. two perspectives. Tomorrow we will discuss two more perspectives. So, thank you and see you tomorrow.